Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to see so many of you here this evening. Thank you for coming. My name is Chris Harwood. I'm president of the New York chapter of SVU, the Czechoslovak Society of Arts and Sciences, and I'm really happy to welcome you to what is our first program of the 2024-2025 academic year. We are grateful to the BBLA, the Bohemian Benevolent and Literary Association, for generously sponsoring all of our programming, and also to the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which has also generously provided grants, especially to support our video recording and archiving of our programming. And we are also grateful to all of you who have contributed individually to support what we do. We encourage you to follow us on social media, to check out our website, and also to especially check out our YouTube channel. And I'd also like to put in a pitch for our next event this fall. It's going to be a book presentation by Anna Radkov, who is an alumna of our 6 Minutes program. And this is just an amazing project that we know about the genesis of, and we're delighted to give it a space here to introduce to you. So mark that in your calendar and see if you can come out for that event. It's a great pleasure for this event to have with us Petra Gelbart to introduce it and provide a little bit of background on the people who are its protagonists. Petra is a Czech Romani ethnomusicologist. She is a musician, a singer, a music therapist, and an activist. She earned her Ph.D. in musicology, ethnomusicology at Harvard University, and she serves as the vice chair of the Czech-Slovak Romani Union. Petra uses her research and her voice and her music to educate the public about Romani culture and to advocate for Romani rights. She's been working with children from Czech State Care for part of each year going back to 2004. So I'm delighted to turn the floor over to Petra for a little bit more to prepare for the screening.
Thank you guys so much for being here. This is a really nice turnout, and you know, my mother would probably have said, "Oh, nobody's going to come to this about us Roma," and she would be so happy. I need to take a picture of all of you, and she's going to be so happy that you all came. So I just want to give a really quick and dirty introduction, because I know not all of you maybe have the background of who are Roma. That's my late grandfather and my daughter, who is now turning 18. My grandparents, both of my Romani grandparents were Holocaust survivors. In case you didn't know, our ancestors came from South Asia. Most of us do not look the way I do. I am half, so just so there's no confusion. The language we speak is Romani. We actually have one of the youngest speakers of that language right here in the front row, which is my youngest child, Niklo. And that is an Indic language, so it's most closely related to Punjabi. And so one of the myths that you may have come across with quote-unquote gypsies is that we are nomadic. There's a tiny percentage for whom that is still true, and for hundreds and hundreds of years, actually the majority of Roma have been settled. We have many different subgroups. So in New York City, it's kind of easy to just say, think Jews, right? So there are Orthodox Jews, there's Hasidic Jews, other Orthodox Jews, and then there are Reform Jews, and then there are atheist Jews, and there are all kinds of multicultural Jews, and it's like that with Roma. We have a big kind of stratification in terms of sort of socioeconomic status. We have different religions, mostly Christian and Muslim. This is just a photo of my grandmother's settlement in Slovakia before she was even born, but not too long before. And here are some photos of wartime Roma and Sinti, just to give you an idea again of that there were many middle-class Roma already at the time of World War II, and I believe every single person that's in these photos was killed in the Holocaust. This is part of a Holocaust exhibit. The man on the right is a distant relative of mine who was a resistance fighter and was considered a war hero in Slovakia. Let's skip that. So now we go to sort of present day Czech Republic. So these are my children, including our oldest sort of bonus child, and they are in Brno. And so when you go to the Czech Republic, it's not hard to see kind of graffiti that says things like gypsies to the gas chamber, or, there's swastikas, there's all kinds of, we've seen it on playgrounds when my kids were little. This one, I honestly think it's actually really funny. I mean, it's not funny, but it is, because it doesn't say Cigani do plynu. It's like, it actually says Romové do plynu. So it's like the politically correct term, or the term that we like to use for ourselves, but aspoň to není Cikáni. And he's totally right, and this is a really good thing because a lot of you speak Czech. My son has made a very good point. I personally cannot stand when people say Cikán. That's not a thing. You can say Cigan, that's a thing. I would prefer that you say Roma, but Cikán is just something that Czech people made up, and it doesn't exist. Nobody says it with a K. We certainly never do, and so thank you, my dear son, for pointing out my pet peeve to all the lovely people here, and now you know not to do it. And this is some of my family in Slovakia. That's this guy when he was little. Here's some just information about the communist era. So this was obviously after the Holocaust. In Czechoslovakia, most of the Slovak Roma survived because the plan for them to be exterminated sort of was delayed, and then the war ended. And the vast majority of the Czech Roma did not survive because they were caught up, that plan was carried out in time, so to speak. So then we had continued over-policing. There were a lot of kind of assimilationist policies that affected the identities of a lot of Roma. So many Roma don't speak Romani anymore, partly as a result of that. So it's very important for me, for my child, to speak Romani. There were a lot of coercive sterilizations, so this actually also involved members of my family, and now there's an ongoing fight to get reparations for some of these women who were forcibly sterilized. And that actually ended up happening until the 2000s. Various things have improved. One of the things that's really improved is we have many more college-educated Roma, not just in the Czech Republic, but also across Europe, in America. When I got my Ph.D. in 2010, I was one of maybe 3 people that I knew of, and now there's kind of a whole bunch, and it's not that much later, so there's an explosion in formally educated Roma, but we still do have quite a bit of school segregation and quite a bit of just lowered opportunities that Romani children have. And I want to actually say, so this film is specifically about Roma coming to the United Kingdom, and I spent almost a year with my now husband, who's also sitting here, Matthew, in London in 2001 to 2002. While he was doing his PhD research, I was volunteering with Romani asylum seekers. And so this film to me is kind of it really resonates because I heard a lot of their stories, and I was helping their kids get situated in school. I was doing interpretation and translation so that some of these families that had been, really, really persecuted at home could get to stay in the United Kingdom. And then I'm in touch with some of them now, and I've seen, how they've kind of grown up to be integrated, and, most of them are doing just fine. But some of the stories were really harrowing. One woman that I've been in touch with her daughter all along, but I just reconnected with her after many, many years with her herself. And there was rape involved by a neo-Nazi. So there was these things kind of combined, and that was awful. We had a girl whose nose was broken in an attack when she was, I think she was 8. So, we actually had kids being physically attacked, and we had a whole bunch of kids who had been placed into schools for children with intellectual disabilities, and then they came to London, and it's obvious to me, as an educator, and it's obvious to me now, knowing them as adults, that they definitely did not and do not have an intellectual disability, and they did just fine in the British school. So that's something that the film talks about. So just we, have a lot of growth in self-representation. So we have Romani media, but we also have journalists, TV people who are in mainstream media, not nearly enough. We really need support for that to be happening more and more. So I just want to say, I want to kind of jump right to Petr Torak. Petr Torak is just one of my favorite people in the entire world. he not only has done, the direct work with people, just helping individual people and families with practical things, but he is a spokesperson, and he's one of these people that, Roma will kind of see him, they'll follow him in the Romani press or on Facebook or whatever, and there's so much pride and there's so much kind of feeling of togetherness around him, because it's sort of like everybody loves Petr Torak. And he actually just, I think literally 2 weeks ago, maybe 2.5 weeks ago, did an online kind of presentation and question and answer session for the summer camp that I co-run, that I've been co-running for many years with my friend, for Romani children being raised by white foster and adoptive families. And he was just so great with them. And they were just starstruck. And they asked him these questions. And even the kids, we have a bunch of teenagers who've kind of grown up with us, and now they're assistants in the program, but they're kind of like, yeah, whatever. One of them's like, do I have to come to this? And I think like 15 minutes into the presentation, he actually sent this guy, Niklo, to the room, and he's like, can you get a notebook? And he was taking notes, and he was asking these questions.
That's one of the people profiled in the film.
Oh, right. Yeah, I'm so sorry. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes. So this film is about 3 people, and one of them is Petr Torak. I don't think I have to say much about him because the film introduces him, but just on this personal level, he does so many things in so many kind of fora. So one of the huge things that I think is absolutely at the crux of what we all should be doing as activists is education. So really, trying to improve not just the school systems for Roma in the United Kingdom, but also having conversations back and forth in the Czech Republic and Slovakia. So I actually went to a meeting, and so did Niklo, a couple of years ago, where we talked about education, and we talked about early childhood stuff, and kind of put our heads together. And he gets a lot of respect from other Roma, and is also just really inspiring. And especially to the little kids who, some of them just kind of, he was a policeman, like we want to become policemen. So that's pretty much it. I think I'm out of time. So I want to thank you again, and I'm really looking forward to having you guys see this film. And if you have any questions for me that I can answer, just let me know afterwards. Thank you.
Want to ask in general, if you look at the Roma culture as it's lived, let's say, with the immigrants in England and Czechoslovakia, how does it compare to the standard, let's say, English culture in terms of the importance of money or time or responsibilities to family or community? Are those kinds of values?
I think when we think we're comparing cultures, a lot of time we're actually comparing classes. So if you compare working class to working class, then you're going to get a lot of the same values, a lot of the same priorities. There's obviously cultural differences like language and customs, and like for a lot of Roma, it's like ritual purity, which is kind of on its way out, but for many Romani communities, that's still an important thing. So that's not something you're going to find in mainstream non-Romani communities. But in terms of like, you know, how important is education, I think that is an important question, and we have a lot of Roma who, you know, the parents did not finish high school, right? Like there's very few people who've finished college, but it's kind of a myth to say that they don't care about education. They do. They don't necessarily know what it takes to make their kids successful in school. So one thing that I talk about a lot is getting books, you know, getting early literacy into the families for preschool age children so that they're more ready by the time you come to school, because a lot of these parents, they get very excited and they buy them all these things and, you know, they have them go to school, but they don't realize that the kids are already behind if they haven't had any books. But again, if you look at any kind of sort of working class community, I think it's going to be very similar, and not just Roma.
I have two questions. One, are Sintis, Romas, what's the distinction between the two of them? And the second question I had is in regards to the way that I understood the film was that the Romas weren't going to regular schools, but they were being placed into special needs school. How is that actually operating? I mean, what's sort of the process by which they sort of get not channeled to a mainstream school and going the other way? So two questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. So Sinti don't call themselves Roma. It's the same origin. So they also came from India. They speak Romani as a language. They just are a distinct subgroup. And so there's not all Romani people call themselves Roma. So like Romani people in Spain call themselves Gitanos or Calais. Calais means black. And so Sinti are just another subgroup. So that's that question. And then, so how do Roma end up in schools for kids with special needs? So there's not one answer, and it's also changed, and now like the name of the schools has changed in the Czech Republic. So they used to be called, you know, special needs schools. Now they're practical schools, and so it's like officially it's not a problem. But you know, generally they are sort of, it's either by location. So the parents will just sort of assume that their kid is going to the school with the other Romani kids, and it happens to be a school for kids with special needs, or it can be by testing. And this, you know, this isn't something that's totally foreign to us in America either. So we have a lot of African American children who get sort of mistested or mislabeled or labeled as emotionally disturbed and sent to, like in New York City, might be a District 75 school, even though, you know, a child with the same behavior that is not African American might just be called, oh, they're just on the spectrum and they just, you know, need a little bit of help. So it's, you know, there's different ways that it happens, but I think there's just still too much kind of tolerance for it, just kind of assuming that these kids don't have the potential. And then there's the thing I talked about before, that, you know, some kids just objectively aren't ready, right? Some kids who would have needed a little bit more you know, stimulation, didn't get it. And so then it looks at age 6 that they really were born with some kind of disability, when in fact what they needed was, you know, just a little bit more help. So I mean, like the Czech Republic has an anti-discrimination law. You technically cannot tell somebody that you will not rent an apartment to them because they're Romani, but people do it anyway. And so, you know, and a lot of the activists will tell Roma, you have to fight it, you have to report it. And then the question is, you know, does that do any good? And it's, you know, it's kind of, it's yes and no. A lot of us, myself included, have had the experience of even dealing with police and trying to report something and being told, like, whatever, you know, we're not going to deal with this. I mean, every single Romani person I know pretty much that's tried to get housing on the open market, it's an issue, because if they're identifiable as Romani, they basically can't get housing, or it's very, very hard for them to get housing on the open market. But there isn't really an institution, like there aren't testers, the government isn't sending testers, the government isn't fining landlords. There's just nothing there to really protect them unless they happen to go to an organization, you know, that takes up their case and somehow, but there's just not enough of those people. And again, I don't think the courts don't really necessarily have the tendency to rule in their favor. Yeah. What? Oh, and same with employment. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the presentation and for educating me in particular, who's not Romani, but I've lived in Europe and kind of felt some of these discriminations. But I wanted to share with you, I thought the most poignant piece in the movie was the perception that, talking about education, that some people aren't the same as others. And when that principal of the school, said that expectation is everything. Even in this country, it happens too, and I'm 65. It happened to me when I left Catholic school to go to public school at 11 years old. I had petitioned my parents at 11 the whole summer to get them to change their mind, to let me go where they had microscopes in school, and I really wanted to go. But because I came from Catholic school to public school, they put me in the lowest classes, thinking that I was not as well educated and that I couldn't do the work at the higher classes. By the end of the year, I was in all the highest classes, but it took my mother going and protesting that they were discriminating against someone who was Catholic.
Yeah, and I think that's
it's a perception, right?
Right, but it also, you are kind of getting to this other issue, which is we need a lot more Romani parents to really kind of, stick up for their kids and to, like I said, understand. And, most of the kids now in the Czech Republic aren't in schools for kids with disabilities. They are in regular schools. And yet, and we have increasing numbers of them finishing high school and all of that, but there still needs to be a lot more kind of understanding in the families themselves. What do you need to do to help your child be successful? I know.
I'm interested in something rather different, namely what the general, I think, perception of Roma gypsies is music. And I didn't hear anything at all about music from these people. Does it still play a part in life? Where is it?
So I heard a few Romani songs in there.
But they had nothing to do with what we have grown up thinking was...
Right. I happen to think that's a good thing in that film, because we're so stereotyped as, and so I actually, full disclosure, did my Ph.D. research in Czech schools on pretty specifically music education. And so I asked a lot of teachers, about their opinions. And, one of the kind of tropes that you get is, oh, the gypsies, they're good at music, not reading notation. They're just good at feeling it and intuitive. And it's just these stereotypes that are kind of I think distracting from what, the actual issues are and are not. That said, it doesn't show up in this film, but I would say for the average Romani family, music, and Romani music specifically, is still very, very important. I happen to think the quality of it has really gone down in the Czech Republic and Slovakia, but that's another story.
But that was actually the kernel of my question. Does it still play an important role in any form whatever in modern?
Oh yeah, because every time we get together, we put on music, we dance. We don't have as many sort of, people playing instruments anymore, but I think that's just the case with, again, everybody, all the kids are on their phone, mobile phones and playing their video games. Yeah, very funny. But, all my kids have played instruments. But yeah, there's, Romani music is thriving, and in fact, the Romani language, unfortunately, is really kind of on its way out, I would say, in the Czech Republic, which is really sad. But songs still tend to be in Romani, and that's one of the main ways that it's getting carried, and one of the main ways that our kids are still learning to at least understand Romani, if not speak it.
Yeah, that's actually what I wanted to ask, about the language. What happens to Romani language when Roma people go to UK? Is it even harder to keep it, or is it on the other way? Maybe they go back to their songs and they study it at the center. It's interesting, right? Because they presumably start to lose their Czech language. So where does the Romani fit into that?
Yeah, and it's exactly what we see here. It's hard enough to keep Czech, which has books and a lot of shows that, we can show our kids on YouTube here. We have almost none of that in Romani. So, I'm trying to think of families I know where somehow they will keep the Romani but not the Czech or the Slovak, and unfortunately, I can't really think of anybody. So it's, in here it was actually really nice, but partly because the young lady had come straight from Slovakia. So they were speaking Romani to each other. And it was, yeah, and I'm hoping that baby, you know, is going to be learning Romani, but it's really hard because I've got my kids, and as you know, I scramble so hard for them to keep up with their Czech, and then it's just like this kind of extra thing to do Romani, and it's really hard without any institutional support.
The people went from the Czech Republic or Slovakia to England. What about the other countries in Europe? I mean, could they have gone to Italy, France, Holland, Denmark, Sweden? I mean, what would have been the receptibility, or would they face some of the same issues that they were having to leave Czechoslovakia? I mean, what are those other countries?
So some of them have gone to, other countries. There's a ton of Eastern European Roma in Germany. There's a bunch in Spain. Where else? There's some in France, yeah. Czech and Slovak Roma specifically, trying to think of, I know they're just like individuals, and mostly they maybe went to like Belgium, for example, but then they came back. I think it just worked out for them better with to be honest, I think, benefits and, being like what you saw here, where it was also just chain migration. So, once there were people there and you had organizations, I was part of an organization in, 2001, 2002 that was teaching Roma English, helping them apply for refugee status and all these things. And so once those things were in place, more and more Roma, and specifically Czech and Slovak Roma, came to that place, as opposed to another country where that wasn't in place. But the organization that I'm with in the United States is called Voice of Roma, and we deal primarily with the situation since the late 90s in Kosovo. And so there were a lot of refugees, Romani refugees, who left Kosovo because they were being, literally ethnically cleansed. And a lot of them went to Germany, and they've had a lot of issues just, with Germany not wanting them. And so sending even people who had been there their whole lives, or people who went back kind of early on and then were, persecuted the minute they got back. So it hasn't been easy for them, and it's still an issue where, even though you'd think that since they came as bona fide refugees, they would have some kind of permanent status there, and they don't necessarily. And then there's also, but there's a lot of, I think, a decent amount of pretty good integration too. But again, I'm not myself a Kosovo or Romani person living in Germany, so I can't really speak to that.
Okay, Petra, thank you so much for your introduction and your response.